watching. Okay, I think we can just begin. Sorry about that, everyone. We are bad at organizing.
I shared it on my channel. We've been going for like a minute.
Great. Okay,
It says ended content. It shows we're real.
great. All right. So, all right, for everybody who knows me but not Rudyard, this is Rudyard Lynch of Whatifalthist. He's a YouTuber as well. And your specialty is just what? History in general? How would you describe yourself and what you know and who you are?
I started out doing alternate history as a teenager, and I did alternate history for 7 years. Like, what if the South won the World Wars, and what if the Nazis won the Civil War? And I
Mm-hmm.
did that for a very long time. And now I do anthropology, history, philosophy, geopolitics.
Okay.
So I try to look at the patterns in history to try to figure out how the world works and what will happen in the future. So we study civilization, we study what countries will have civil wars, the factors that result in societies doing positively or negatively. And so I do that full time as my job. And Mr. Ho and I have been friends for like 6 months, I think.
A little while,
Um,
yeah. We've been chatting.
yeah, yeah. So I'm pumped to be here.
Yeah, me too. So, when you say alternate history, you mean you just have learned history on your own, basically, right?
Yeah,
And and
yeah.
and so you go back to major events or interesting events in history, and you begin your channel by modeling what would have happened if conditions were different.
That's what I used to do. I stopped doing that 4 years ago, and I started when I started taking this channel more seriously. And so I used to do stuff like the Nazis win World War II
Mm-hmm.
or the Spanish don't conquer Mexico. What happens afterwards from that? And through gradually accumulating skills from that, I moved on the actual history content.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't done alternate history in 4 years because it just feels like it's doing fanfic of real history,
Right.
where, a lot of fantasy authors start out doing fanfic for another fantasy universe. And
Mm-hmm.
then as that goes on, they derive skills to write their own fantasy novels. And I think the content I make now is it's much more meaningful to the world. And
Mm-hmm.
it's something people derive more value from. And so it's alternate history was a fun phase for me to go through, but I don't want to go back.
Sure. So, how would you characterize the content that you make now compared to the alternate history? What is the? Because I know that you have basically like you do a lot of predictive things. You made a video
Yeah,
about
yeah,
the coming incel revolution is a hot
yeah,
topic because dissatisfied men. We kind of know what happens
yeah.
in history with that. How would you characterize what you do now?
So I look at as I said before, I look at the patterns for why civilizations rise and fall. And so I do a lot of civilizational analysis. So I've looked at the strengths and weaknesses of China, the West, India, the Greeks and the Romans. I also I do a lot of anthropology content. Anthropology is actually the thing I'm strongest at, but
Mm-hmm.
I do also do a lot of predictive stuff. Like, I think America will have a civil war within the next year.
Hmm.
And whenever I go on podcasts, that's the thing that people want me to talk about. But I talk about that. I think we're on the verge of a psychological Black Death.
Mm-hmm.
When my father talks to friends, he says my son's job is he tries to use history to understand current events. And I
Yeah.
think that's their descriptor.
Yeah. Okay. That's I did a live recently, and I the first thing that I wrote was 16 months left before everything is. So I'm sort of feeling the same thing. We're kind of on the same page about a lot, which is why I think
Yeah,
this will be
yeah.
a great interview. Um,
I
yeah. Go ahead.
yeah, it's just I think this age of history is a time period that is a very brief and crazy one, and we'll look back upon it as just complete insanity, but now we don't have the self-awareness to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Very few people have the ability to reflect on the way that I look at it is people don't really think about how is your life going? How does that compare to what came before you? And how does that whole
Yeah,
packet compare to like rising and falling in history? And like what context are
yeah,
you in? People don't really think about that as much.
yeah,
And I think you and I think about it too much and it gives us issues. So,
yeah. Context is everything.
yeah.
You only know what something is based off what it is not, but modernity by isolating in modernity it's taboo to say that you can use history to understand the present.
Mhm.
you could not do what I do in academia. There is no one in Western academia who does this. There are there are four people who study the patterns and history of the future. Two of them are Israeli, one is Russian, another is French.
Mm-hmm.
And if you try this in American academia, you'll be outcasted and shamed. It's just taboo to do.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny where you think, why is that taboo? And I was telling a friend, I told him, the reason we don't want to look to history for patterns is because we know what we're doing is wrong. And so we know that we would have to be held to standards
Mm-hmm.
if we did that. And we don't want to see. And all of the big authors who are best in this field, Amory Durancourt, Carol Quigley, William McNeill, they were all writing around the world wars. And because around that time period, you could be logical, but now you're not allowed to be logical.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
everything has to be emotional and magical thinking.
Yeah,
And now
for
if
sure.
you do that, it's social, you're a far right extremist.
Yeah.
And since the 60s, because I think we were on the verge of a technological breakthrough or a
Mm-hmm.
social breakthrough with understanding the laws of history. And then that just didn't happen because it got steamrolled by the 60s and listen to your heart and follow your dreams. And
Yeah.
everyone's special in that stuff.
Yeah, listening to your heart and following your dreams is kind of like it's like these mass instructions to just believe that you can get your wishes to come true against any kind of indicators in
Yeah.
reality. And now people are so addicted to that they're hanging on to it like straight down into the gutter.
I love your chart. It's so adorable. Like, I
Yeah.
never thought you'd make a chart for me.
Oh, you should have thought that. I make charts. That's what I do. So yeah, before I blow up the chart and get into it, yeah, we open pretty much how I wanted to. Our channels are, different, but in a way we are focused on kind of the same thing. Like there's a problem
Yeah.
brewing in society. I feel like it's pretty urgent to talk about it.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
most people either don't want to address it or can't address it. And they say, those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it, and those who do are doomed to watch. So we're kind of
Yeah.
just in a position where we're trying to find a safe spot to bunker down. I don't know what to do about it. I don't know if there is anything to do about it. Do you think there's anything to do other than just look out for yourself?
There's often not solutions to problems. And this is one of the things I see where I see this with a lot of dating content because I have basically watched every single major dating YouTuber. And I
Mhm.
think Homath is one of my favorites, if not my favorite. So congrats to you, sir.
Thank you.
But Homath is holistically smarter than almost all the others in a variety of different metrics. We can get into that later.
Mhm.
And that his comprehension of knowledge is he goes into different areas that others don't. So a lot of problems don't have solutions. And one of the things I see with the dating crisis is people are like, there's this quick fix to this giant issue.
Mhm.
But the reality is often life just sucks and you have to deal with it. And if you're a 4 out of 10, I
Mhm.
don't think just going to the bar all the time will fix that.
Right.
And it's really hard to tell people. Like the Black Death killed half of Europe's population.
Yeah.
And the Black Death is entering your town. What do you do about it except hope to not die?
Yeah, you gotta just have enough money for a horse and a cart.
Yeah, and even if you go out to the town, even if you go to the countryside, it's still a pretty good shot you die.
Yeah.
And like all these young male improvement channels, they're all like, oh yeah, you should just bang chicks and get rich and that stuff. And I'm thinking, again, if you're a sub-average intelligence, 4 out of 10,
Mhm.
how are you supposed to get rich and attractive?
Right.
And one of the things I said in one of my recent videos is that don't rely on society for approval and do the things that make you happy, and try to build up your own internal sense of self-worth. And if you look at the history of religion,
Mhm.
religion's formed once societies hit certain thresholds where religions developed once you had these giant social structures where there wasn't a chance to succeed. And so all the people who can't succeed socially and have kids, part of the role of religion is to give them a sense of self-worth independent from their social status.
Yeah, we used to do things with people who didn't fit in elsewhere, and we kind of don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
Is that historically novel, or has that happened anywhere else that you know of?
Um, use Using religion to get around
No,
losing.
the experience of not having something set up to deal with those people, the extra people.
Yeah, it's so one of the interesting historic parallels is between our current society and the Axial Age.
Hmm.
And the Axial Age is around 500 BC. Zoroaster, Buddha, Lao Tzu, the founder of Taoism, Confucius, and Socrates all lived at the same time.
Hmm.
And the reasoning for that is that the coin was developed in 500 BC. And before 500 BC, all of trade was done through relationships. So let's say you're in a village and there's a baker.
Hmm.
The baker has IOU relationships with everyone in the town, so they've memorized all the who IOs use for whatever. So like the baker gives out bread to the a farmer, and the farmer says, "Okay, in the future you have 5 IOUs to give me grain,"
Hmm.
and and so that's how society works. Once you invent the coin, that all breaks down because you just give someone coins. There's no need for IOUs. But the result of that was the complete breakdown of social life because without the IOUs, there was no incentive to be a decent person. So society collapsed into slavery, genocide, mass sexual depravity, people being horrible people, banditry,
Yeah.
aggressive wars as the social code broke down. And the Axial Age, or those major world religions like Confucianism, Buddhism, Taoism, Hinduism is a bit later. The
Hmm.
ancient Greek philosophers, they were all a reaction to this because we need to establish social codes as a way of holding society together
Yeah.
once we've removed this social system in the same manner that with the internet, the internet meant we destroyed all the previous interpersonal social networks. So we need to figure out a new way to deal with this social technology
Yeah.
that erases our previous social traditions.
Yeah, we've got to figure out a way to kind of enforce standards. I'm gonna bring up the chart now since I did
Yeah,
make it. I just drew kind of a cycle where, um, civilizations collapse from time to time. People have no
yeah,
choice but to rebuild. At some point, you get a chance to learn from your mistakes, but
yeah,
the rebuilding often causes conditions where people just sort of get greedy. I've got the I want
yeah,
free
yeah,
stuff guy here. And I think that you and I, the way that we view ourselves is we took a close look at how
yeah,
these
yeah,
cycles happen, and we're trying to tell these people who don't really want to
yeah,
listen because they think they're going to go just straight to what is it, fully automated luxury space gay communism
yeah,
or
yeah,
whatever. They think that
yeah,
it's just gonna, as soon as they are in control of the law, everything is gonna be great. But we know that that's not what happened the last time we've done
yeah,
these things. So I'd like to avoid getting here. I'm not sure if it's possible to do that, but that's my
yeah.
little cycle that I
Yeah, I agree with that.
yeah.
Homaf had a call about this beforehand, and I'm glad that this is a pretty intelligent descriptor of the conversation we had beforehand.
Hmm. What? Which one are you referring to?
Remember we called a couple weeks ago when you asked what we would talk about?
Yeah.
I'm impressed that from that conversation you got that chart.
Oh well, I'm very good at notes.
Huh.
I took a lot of
Yeah.
notes while you were talking. Yeah. So yeah, thank you. I
I
appreciate
also
that.
like the number for lie versus real because that
Yeah.
the reality is always complicated and multifaceted. And I was once in a debate with a communist
Hmm.
where he said you should always support. He was drawing this through line where he said it's the same kinds of people who were for the end of slavery, who are for BLM, who are for all this stuff. And he said, why don't you support progress? And I said, progress isn't a single line. It's all these
Right.
various factions fighting. Yeah, he's the top one.
Yeah.
And then I
People.
said
Yeah.
progress, all these various factions, where I said the people who pushed for the abolition of slavery were completely different from the people who pushed the civil rights movement for the BLM. They all had different agendas.
Yeah.
You're dealing with different groups of people with different motivations, where like the descendants of the guys who fought against slavery in the Civil War, they're like white rural guys in the Midwest.
Right.
Um, and so the world itself is complicated and there's all these different trajectories and it's messy. And the more I read history, the more I realize the world is a very messy place. In
Yeah.
every single era of history, is a lot more complicated and dirty, but also beautiful than we imagine.
Yeah, there isn't always just one set of rules that applies.
Yeah,
It's just, every time we come up to something like this, even the best informed people cannot necessarily figure it out. The hardest part, I think,
yeah,
is getting people to listen. But I think if there's anything that we can get people to listen to, it's that one of the worst things for me is the people, like you were just describing, who view history as it was always bad for whatever
yeah,
X reason, like capitalism or patriarchy or whatever.
exactly.
And now we have feminism and everything's getting good. It's this very simplistic view of history, whereas
Yeah,
in reality, in the same time frame, many different societies will fluctuate through more feminine or more masculine forms of
yeah,
social control and rules. And some of these motions in either direction can go really well or really poorly. And people tend to
yeah,
be, would you agree, people tend to be happy towards a balanced middle?
yeah. You need to have it's you need to integrate positive and negative aspects, but you definitely need to have masculine leadership.
Yeah. So what happens when you don't have masculine leadership? What does that look like?
The masculine and the feminine are proxies for how societies deal with order and chaos. This is a
Hmm.
video I've been meaning to make for a long time, and it's based off this book. This is one of the best history books I've read. It's Sex and Power and History by
Yeah.
Amory de
Hmm.
Riencourt. And this is my favorite author, and it's about how the relations between the genders resulted in the rise and fall of civilizations.
Yeah.
And so societies fluctuate massively in how they treat men and women, and that's not something we really think about.
Right.
And a society that gives women too much authority will just devolve into chaos and degeneracy. And
Yeah.
so if you look at the societies that are too feminist, what ends up happening is that just you have no moral standards, you have no nothing gets done, everyone's backstabbing each other because the feminine is fluid and chaotic, and the societies that are too masculine result in social ossification
Yeah.
where you can't change and everything is rigid and just they're scared of anything new.
Yeah.
And the societies that do the best integrate the positives. So you can have balance, but there's healthy balance and there's unhealthy imbalance.
Yeah.
For example, there are societies that are 50-50 masculine, feminine, in they take the worst traits of men and women. There are
Really?
societies that are very successful who are 50-50 masculine, feminine, who take the good aspects of men and women and find ways to counteract the bad.
Yeah.
And I have examples of each of those if you'd like.
Yeah. Let's hear it.
So societies that are negatively masculine are the medieval Asian civilizations.
Hmm.
So, starting around 1000 AD, all the civilizations of Asia became too masculine, where women had basically no rights. They were married off at age 15. They would have a bunch of kids. Any red pillar's wet dream is what India, China, and the Middle East were like from 1000 AD until 1900.
Hmm.
And you saw a lot of things like you saw a lot of things like the cutting off female genital mutilation, where they cut out parts of a woman's private so that
Yeah.
uh, she can't experience positive sexual emotions. Um, you have burning widows. You have breaking women's feet so they can't walk.
Yeah.
A lot of red pillars say that men have never oppressed women, but having looked
Hmm.
at those Asian civilizations, I can't find a logical justification for like cutting off a woman's genitals and breaking her feet.
Right.
And so the thing with those societies is that Asia was the most developed place in the world before then, but after 1000 AD is when Europe became a really strong. Europe started to do really well right when the rest of Asia started to decline,
Hmm.
and so India, China, Islam, they stopped doing anything past that point. And the reason is that imagine you're a guy, you're given a 15-year-old bride who has no rights, and you
Hmm.
just have kids.
Yeah.
She is a fully developed person. She can't hold you accountable.
Right.
You, uh, at the same time, you can, if in the almost all societies in history practice arranged marriages except Europe. And Europe stopped practicing arranged marriages around 1000 AD.
Hmm.
And that was also when Europe took off. So the invention of arranged marriages the stopping of arranged marriages is one of the most important events in human history, in my opinion. And so you're married off age 15 in an arranged marriage. You spend your whole life raising a family. And in these societies, everyone lives in clans. So your parents determine who you marry, who you work with, who you live with. Your entire life is dominated by your family. In Europe, breaking out of that was the biggest reason why Europe became so successful.
So
But
would you say that that's like basically what we were looking at was Europe was stuck in too
yeah,
much
exactly.
rigidity,
Too
and
masculine.
one of the biggest reasons
Yeah,
that Europe developed was sliding down towards
yeah.
the benefits of
Europe
both.
got a Europe got a great balance of 50-50.
Great.
But to finish with the masculine before we move on to the feminine,
Yeah.
what ironically happened in these very societies where women had no social authority, men, and so this is why the Asian societies haven't really militarily conquered stuff
Right.
recently, and like why I don't know what's okay to say on YouTube. Why like why like East Asian men don't really have the reputation for being masculine, even
Right.
though if you go back further in history, you'll see that those societies were doing a lot of cool stuff. And so whenever you push something to its extremity, you find its opposite. So when you make societies too when you make societies too masculine, they actually end up becoming effeminate. In the same way, when you push societies to be too feminine, it becomes masculine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Shall I move on to female societies?
Yeah. Yeah. Let's hear a little bit about that. And then we'll go on to the next question.
Feminine societies, when societies become too feminine, they devolve into chaos. And so examples of this are actually Islam 1,000 years ago was a technologically advanced, scientific, wealthy capitalist society. And then Islam hit a feminist period. And periods of feminism are correlated with social degeneracy.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a bunch of things where it's lack of moral standards, everyone's cutthroat looking out for their own special interests.
Mm-hmm.
People lose track of what's going on in the outside world.
Mm-hmm.
They lose the ability to fight or accomplish new things. And so this is Islam 1,000 years ago. This was the Greeks and the Romans as they fell. France before its revolution and us.
Yeah.
And so although there are many positives to femininity, there are some negatives. And because women aren't really involved with fighting or fight against the external world, if a society becomes too feminine, it loses track of external threats and everything becomes a petty status competition.
Yeah.
And that's what happens to the entire society. And so what occurs is that you hit you hit patriarchal waves roughly every 500 years, with
Okay.
the last one being the Protestant Reformation. Before that, around 1000 AD, the fall of Rome, around Augustus. You can push these back pretty far.
Okay.
And so what happens is the society becomes, and Aristotle once said, masculine republics lead to feminine democracies, which leads to
Yep.
Caesarism and tyranny.
Yeah.
And so you need the balancing the masculine and the feminine between order and chaos. And Europe is a great example of a society which balanced the positives and the negatives really well.
All right.
Yeah?
No, I was just listening. Go ahead.
Okay, Europe is a society that balanced the positives and negatives, wherein Europe had the highest social status for women of any major civilization.
Mm-hmm.
One of the principles is almost every single Christian society has treated women better than almost every single non-Christian society.
Yeah.
You could say Christianity is the best thing that ever happened to women. And what happened in Europe, where women were given enough social authority that they could hold men accountable. And so in Europe, for example, Europe discovered so much and invented so many technologies and did so much because in most societies, you were married off at a young age in an arranged marriage.
Mm-hmm.
In Europe, you married when you wanted to. So you went out into the world. You, let's say, discovered a new country, you invented a new technology, and then that leveled up your SMV.
Yeah.
And so you had that, and there's an area called the Hajnal line. And the Hajnal line is the line where this takes place. And most discoveries in the last 1,000 years have occurred within the Hajnal line.
Oh.
And so Europe had enough social authority to hold men accountable so that men should be brave and achieve.
Mm-hmm.
But also Europe had a masculine society and a masculine warrior culture, which made the Europeans do stuff and made them holds people to intellectual standards,
Yeah, we
and
don't. Yeah,
all
we
those
don't have
theories,
that anymore, right? And we're
yes,
but we remain
yeah,
still very permissive
yeah.
towards women and women's rights. Would you say one of the most permissive societies in history, or
Oh, easily we're easily the most permissive society ever towards women.
yeah,
Um,
that's a thing that I really would like to get across to people that we're I guess
we're
according to you,
completely absurd.
yeah,
Yeah,
like the most permissive society, and yet the complaint is that the oppression is still there and that there's a long way to go.
yeah. I
Yeah,
mean, it's not even close. We're in like the 99th point. The next most permissive society is like two standard deviations less permissive than us. And
yeah,
there's actually a reason for that, where there's a term called GSR, or
hmm,
gossiping, shaming, and rallying, which is
yeah,
feminine relational warfare, where women, my favorite video of Homaths is Who's a 10?
yep,
And um, women use women are just as aggressive as men, and this is something we've found repeatedly with science. But for women, it's relationship words, and for men, it's through actual war. And so, GSR is a term one of my friends developed called gossiping, shaming, and rallying,
yep,
and it's using language for your own benefit. And um, GSR is literally one of the most damaging things you could do as a society. But
yep,
And my friend wrote an entire theory of history around how lessening GSR, he wrote a history of the world through GSR. But if you want to understand why the society that's most permissive to women ever is also the society that complains the most about it, it's since using GSR as an effective tool, where by basically saying that by beating ourselves up for being so toxically masculine, it allows toxic femininity to act.
yep,
And one of the things you see with the left of the left says, and anything the left says about the right is projection. Whenever you want to see what the left is thinking, look at what they say about the right.
yep,
And so when they say toxic masculinity, they really mean toxic femininity. And if you go on a sheet and write down everything the left calls toxic masculinity, it's a pretty good definition for how toxic femininity acts.
yep. And this is, you mentioned Who is a 10. These are just,
Yeah.
just quickly drawn examples of ways that women use GSR to
Yeah.
achieve their ends, which are
Yeah.
ultimately deconstructing some of the foundations, some of the pillars of society.
Yeah. I'd like to talk about Who's a 10 because I think it's one of your, I really like that video and there's a lot to unpack there.
Sure,
Um,
yeah,
the thing I like is the external appearance of equality masks the actual relational warfare,
hmm,
because if you can't talk about conflict, there's no way to call anyone out for it.
right. So you can't actually say what people are doing. Like I've made these two man versus bear videos where I'm
Yeah.
talking about how it's just absurd to think that a woman would get in an elevator with a bear instead of a man because she would feel safer.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they are making the claim that that is how they feel, and if you call them out on it, a lot of them get really upset.
It's
Um,
funny that
yeah,
Homath and I released responses to the bear question on the same day, and we said
yeah,
the same thing.
yeah, yeah. We're pretty much on the same page. So yeah, did like have any questions about the Who's a 10 or want to
Yeah.
talk about it in the specifics?
Yeah, it always shocks me that high value women play along with the game and they're terrified of the lowers ganging up on them.
Yeah, because they
Um,
know what's going to happen too.
yeah. And I think a lot of it is spite. They pick something so ridiculous
Yeah,
because one of the ideas I have at toxic femininity is it makes you agree to something explicitly ridiculous to as a power game.
yeah,
And so when you make Gorlock the Destroyer, and when she knows she's not a 10. When she makes you do it, she kind of
yeah,
she gets off on it because the ability to get people to accept absurdities is a sign of your power.
yeah, yeah. Say the obvious lie or else is
Yeah,
pretty much,
exactly.
yeah. Yeah, I've been through a lot of that myself. It's not very comfortable. I have a lot of difficulty with that. I've my whole life I've been just saying, hey, here's a truth that no one wants to talk about. Um,
Yeah,
that's my orientation. So I'm definitely not able to be out in the world dealing with people who do stuff like that. I
yeah.
wonder how common that is.
It depends definitely what part of the country you're in.
Yeah.
Um, because I've moved around the country. It's a lot better in Texas than the Northeast.
For sure.
But yeah, I mean, it depends. Everyone's got their own intellectual prism, and you have to agree to the rules of the principle prism to operate in their game.
Yeah.
And even in the red pill spaces, like I see certain like circle jerked truth. I see
Mm-hmm.
certain circle jerked truths that I wish people would examine more, but
Yeah.
people end up. A big part of my motivation is that any community ossifies so that creative people
Mm-hmm.
don't have a place there. And so
Right.
one of my goals is so that creative people who think outside the box will always have a place to push boundaries in our intellectual community.
Yeah. Yeah. So I just want to sort of explain in one sweep what I think is happening and get your take on it.
Yeah.
Basically, I think we're about here in the cycle, and this bad thing might be
Yeah,
coming,
yeah.
and we're gonna have to deal with this. I mean, I hope I'm not too old by then. I'm getting pretty tired already. I think that a lot of people who think that they're doing good and they have a lot of righteous indignation, despite the fact that we're in the most permissive society for women ever,
Yeah.
believe that the farther we go, the better things are going to get, despite the fact that things are not getting better. And I think that's pretty commonly accepted by this point.
Yeah.
The farther this goes, the more women are saying things like they are getting more, independence, and they're raising their standards, which
Yeah.
is having the effect of disenfranchising, more and more men. I don't have my not people card out, but I guess I could go fish it out.
Yeah.
It's sending more and more men into the you don't get anything, we don't care about you, you're more dangerous than a bear, we can do anything we
Yeah.
want to you because we don't like you, is putting more men under that. And they don't like being there. And
Yeah.
that is one of the things that's going to cause the, this thing to happen. And then there's going to be, another big
Yeah. Yeah.
fluctuation. I don't think anybody wants to live through that, but I think at this point, do you think there's any slowing it down or turning it around or?
So, what I would say is that I agree with your entire thesis, and it plays into my incel revolution thesis, where I've looked at the statistics about male sexlessness, and once male sexlessness gets to a certain rate, you can't not have a revolution.
Yeah.
This is a pattern we've seen going back into history. I think I like to say in my channel, most of my channel is describing two issues. The
Mm-hmm.
first is the political crisis, which I think will break out in the next year.
Mm-hmm.
And the second is the psychological and demographic crisis.
Yeah.
And so the political crisis is just going to happen. I think it's going to happen in the next year, no stopping it. The demographic crisis, which is, if you look at birth rates, the world's population will crash over the next century. In addition to that, I invented a theory called the psychological Black Death,
Mm-hmm.
which is I think that we are in the process of a mental health pandemic, which will cull a large part of the population. And the thing with both of them is I don't think we're in a place to stop them.
Yeah.
Yet at the same time, we are in a place to make the results better. And if you look at hinge moments in history, there are certain times in history of rapid change where slight choices in that time period resulted in outsized changes for centuries afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
And we are hitting one of those hinge points. And the great thing is that no one else is cognizant of these issues. So any group of people who become cognizant of these issues will automatically win,
Mm-hmm.
since no one else is ready for it. And I look at the population issues, no one is having kids. So the few people who will be having kids will be the ones who inherit the earth.
Yep. Do you know who those are? I mean, we know it's like, what is it? The Amish and the Mormons and Muslims,
Yeah.
and it's just the religious
So
people, right?
yeah. As of now, it's the rural and religious. If you
Yeah.
look over history, the rural and the religious are the only ones with sustainable birth rates. Even back in the ancient world, city dwellers and the agnostic population rate is collapsing
Mm-hmm.
everywhere.
Yeah.
And so a lot of things that will surprise people are that the Middle East and South America don't have sustainable birth rates anymore.
Yeah.
In a couple of years, white Americans will have a higher birth rate than Hispanic Americans. East Asians are the group that's the highest affected.
Hmm.
Immigrants to Europe, their birth rates crash down really quickly after one generation.
Mm-hmm.
So the results of this are not what a lot of people think they are. And this is going to take a century to play out. And so really, I think over time people will develop institutions and groups that are about surviving this crisis. But I think people are so um, they're so ignorant today. But I
Mhm.
think once people get slapped in the face, a lot are going to get realer.
What do you think that's going to look like? What I want to ask you about this is I want to know, what do you think are the major signs that
Yeah,
this turn is coming? Because, there's still people who are like, invest in a 401k, buy a house, go to college, and that seems so
yeah,
absurd to me. It seems like
yeah,
I feel like we've already gone off the cliff. We're sailing towards the ground. People are like, go to
yeah,
college. So I want to know, you think this is going to happen within a year. What are the major signs of it, especially ones that you have seen elsewhere in history?
yeah.
And and what do you think people can do in order to, like, find or
Yeah.
create those institutions to survive it or to lessen it?
So again, there are two crises. There's the demographic one and the political one.
Yep.
The political crisis, you can predict, there's a computer model that predicts when societies have revolutions, and it's predicted over 20 historic crises, whether the fall of Rome, the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, the Black Death, the wars of religion.
Hmm.
And this computer model predicts those crises to the years they happened in. And it's based off three variables, that being income inequality, average wages, and competition for elite jobs.
Hmm.
Those three variables predict when societies have revolutions and civil wars. And the reasoning is that once average wages get low enough and there's so much competition for very few good jobs, is that you remove an incentive for cooperating inside the society. And the incentive then becomes to start wars so that your group can be the one that wins. And so over history, you see the population splitting into different demographics. So you
Yeah.
have the whites and the reds in the Russian Civil War. You have the Armagnacs and the Burgundians. You have the Lancasters and Yorkists, parliamentarians and Roundheads. And each of them represent different sub-demographics of the population.
Hmm.
In our society, the right versus left is predicted by college educated versus non-college educated.
Hmm.
Um, Almost all of the basically every single leftist policy can be understood of getting the college educated more money and power, and everything the right does, the non-college educated.
Hmm.
And do you have any questions before I move on to the demographic crisis?
No, yeah, let's hear about the
Yeah.
demographic crisis.
So the demographic political crisis is more of a civilizational issue, and the civilizational crises are slower and they're harder to understand, but they still operate under principles that are comprehensible. For example, it took 400 years for the Roman Empire took 250 years to fall apart.
Hmm.
That's a pretty long period of time, and it was so long that no one at the time thought Rome was falling. That's a
Yeah.
point I want to say here. Before these
Yeah.
revolutions or crises, no one thinks they're going to happen. But for
Yes.
civilizational decline, the variables are collapse in religion, urbanization, um, sexual degeneracy, breakdown of the family,
It's this guy.
then birth rate. Will Durant, who I have a shelf of his books over there, Will Durant writes about this the best of anyone.
Hmm.
And also, the biggest variable is the co-opting of uh, the society for a single social class. And so it was the slave owners in Greece and Rome, it
Hmm.
was the bureaucrats in China, it was the priests in India, and in our society, it's the bureaucracy.
Hmm.
And so in our society, the bureaucracy, you could view anything the left does as an attempt by the bureaucracy to get more power. And
Right.
so a civilization goes into decline once a single class co-ops it, and then the society loses its vigor and its sense of connection to the earth and realness. And so societies in decline feel very sterile. They feel like
Yeah.
nothing. They feel nihilistic.
Yeah, a
No
lot
one.
of people have been saying lately that they feel like life isn't real, and like since
Yeah,
the
I've
pandemic,
read
it's like it's fake, and we're just going through the motions.
exactly.
Yep.
And the authors who were writing about this stuff a century ago, they predicted all of this. And so Spengler, who was writing around World War I, he said that in the year 2000, the West would be faced with nihilism. It would be faced with Caesarism, population decline. People would flee to the countryside to escape the cities, and
Yep.
everything would feel sterile and meaningless.
Yep. Yep. So So yeah, when you say there was a phrase that you used earlier, something about co-opting a society,
Yeah.
like one class co-opts a society. By that, do you mean in America or in the West that the bureaucratic class is acting as if it is the society, or what does that mean exactly?
So, in these kinds of societies, the entire society becomes run serving a single class interest.
Uh-huh.
And for example, in India, India was a society which, before the birth of Christ, was co opted by the priests. And
Mm-hmm.
so in India, they believed reality didn't exist. They believed that the priests were the highest social class,
Mm-hmm.
that God ordained social classes where the priests were on top, and that the only thing that mattered was spiritual growth, not economic well-being. In India, they thought it was greedy to make the peasants richer because that the peasants' duty was to become more spiritual. And if you're richer, you have less reason to be spiritual. And
Mm-hmm.
from the Western perspective, you think, oh, isn't that all incredibly self-serving for the priest class? But if you're Indian, that's just how the world works.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just obvious to them, or it was until the British colonized them. And for us, one of my favorite history book or political books is The Leviathan and Its Enemies by Sam Francis. And that's a book about how the bureaucracy runs society. And so in that book, he goes through movies, he goes through politics, he goes through the governance system, through corporations, through every the power of the bureaucracy.
Mm-hmm.
So leftist ideology is one of them. And what that means is that every single thing the left says is you have a utopia if you give a bureaucracy more power.
Mm-hmm.
You look at the executive branch. You have these departments that exist solely to write regulations.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing to push back against it. That's a mechanism to grow the bureaucracy. You
Right.
have all these. There's so much red tape, and the reason there's so much red tape to do anything is that they want you to hire another bureaucrat to go through the red tape.
Ah.
And so you look at the film industry. They keep on making Terminator 13 because the bureaucrats are the ones in charge, not the creatives.
Right.
And so the bureaucrats want this easy, cheap movie so that they can keep making money and they don't care the creativity. Our school trains people to be bureaucrats, where the
Yeah.
skills bureaucrats need are the skills the school system needs. The way we select the upper class is that we have them take tests to go through college.
Mm-hmm. So the
And
values of
again,
the
truly bureaucrats.
yeah, so the values of the bureaucracy have just filtered down into the lower classes, and everybody's
Yeah,
trying to mimic them. And the
yeah,
more that they do that, the more it doesn't work because bureaucracy just fundamentally is non-productive.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting aside. I want to ask you about your two videos about one the incel revolution or uprising, and then mouse utopia.
Yeah,
I think you mentioned to me that a lot of wars have been taught to us as being about this or
yeah,
that thing or this value or that value, but really it's just like a lot of men don't have wives and don't have a future.
yeah, exactly. Do you mind if I run to the bathroom and then answer?
Yeah, sure.
Thank
We
you.
can hang out. I'll just like chat with people, I guess. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm working on a bunch of stuff. Rudyard is taking a bathroom break. And so I'm going to tell you about some things that I'm doing. I have this video I'm working on. There's a whole, this one is really actually super touchy. I hope you guys are here to see me and not Rudyard, because this one is about, it's that video with that girl who said that she went over a guy's house and and she told him not to try anything and he didn't, and then she was like, "What, are you gay?" So I'm going to explain that to the best I can. I'm really walking right on the line with that one, but I have a chart for it. That one is getting done. I'm going to do one about, I'm going to sort of explain who I am at one point too. I've been flashing this one. This is like how good my life has been. And I know a lot of you who, pay attention when I do my lives or whatever. You hear me talk about what COVID did to me, and that was the best point of my life down to the worst. So this will get colorful and interesting as time goes on. I hope Rudyard is only doing a short bathroom break, so I don't have all that much else to share with you. I guess I could just make that bigger. Here we go. Show it to you again. There's this. There's my life map. Here is the very touchy video I'm making about the girl who called the guy gay for not violating what she said. She said no, but meant kind of yes a little bit. Um, that one will be fun to post. I wonder if I can open up like. Oh, is Rudyard back?
Hola, ¿cómo estás, señor?
Hey, what's up? All right, let's get
So
back
you
to
asked
it.
about incels.
Hmm?
You asked me about incels.
Yeah, the
The revolution.
your video, the incel uprising, and then Mouse
Yeah, yeah,
Utopia, and
yeah,
specifically about the incel revolution or uprising.
yeah.
What other wars or conflicts or historical things from the past were we taught happened because of some value or some political
Yes,
development, but were actually just because men were mad that they couldn't get
yeah.
wives in futures?
Great question. So I'll answer that question in two ways. The first is that you have polygamous and you have monogamous societies.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Polygamous men have multiple wives. Monogamous men, you're only allowed to have one wife.
Mm-hmm.
There are basically no societies where women have multiple men. And so polygamous societies make up 86% of the societies over history. But in most polygamous societies like China or the Middle East, polygamy is pretty pretty low,
Mm-hmm.
where a handful of the richest men have 3 or 4 wives, but
Yeah.
most people aren't. The societies in the world that have the most polygamy today are in West Africa.
Mm-hmm.
Every single one of the top 10 polygamous societies in the world is currently in a civil war or had a civil war in the last 10 years.
Wow.
And what happens in these countries is exactly what's happening today, in that you have these rich guys, these Chads, and
Mm-hmm.
Chad's actually a country where this is the case, ironically. The Chads
Yeah.
and Chad.
Mm-hmm.
The Chad collect all these wives, and so you have these incel armies. And
Yeah.
so Boko Haram is a great example of that happening.
Mm-hmm.
And
So these guys just get
other
mad.
examples, yeah, I love your not people chart.
Yeah.
The other example of that historically is that once the average age of marriage gets above 38, you're going to have a civil war. Examples of that include the French Revolution, the Black Death, the 30 Years' War.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, once the average of marriage gets above 28, not 38.
28. Okay.
Yeah. And so we're at 30 right now.
Ooh.
And so
Yeah.
what happens, the average age of marriage actually doesn't fluctuate over history,
Uh-huh.
in that the average age of marriage was the same in the 20th century as it was in the 10th century, but that's a different aside. And so once people's reproduction gets too difficult, they start wars. In the French Revolution, cost of life was super high.
Mm-hmm.
So these young men rebelled because they had nothing better to do.
Yeah.
And a lot of wars are really they're the rationalization of some underlying primal need. And it's scary that the authorities don't pay attention to this, because I have friends who are involved with national security and that stuff, and no one in the elite is in any way cognizant of this as even as a threat. It's just insane.
Yeah, they seem to treat it on a very shallow surface level, where they just say
Yeah,
there's this group of people who have been typing angry things online, so they're bad, go smash them. But
exactly.
they don't understand it any deeper than that in a way that you could
Yeah.
change any conditions to
I've
solve
been
it.
on I've been on probably like 5 or 6 podcasts talking about the incel revolution, and
Mhm.
so I've kind of memorized the instinctive responses people have.
Yeah.
And the big thing is people assume the incels are the 3 through 1 men, where if the bottom 20 to 30% of men are dissatisfied, no one cares about them. The
Right.
problem you're running into is when it's 80% of men.
Yeah.
Which it is, like, the statistics are that 80% of men aren't doing well. And even the guys who are doing well, I don't think that many of them are satisfied. Like, a lot of Chads are not happy with their life
Yeah.
because
I met a
they
bunch of
don't,
them. Yeah.
they don't respect the women that they're with.
Yep.
A lot of guys who are married don't like their wives. I think there's widespread dissatisfaction. And one of the really interesting things of this incel topic is that people always act, there's no concept that the dating market can fluctuate in the manner of the economic market. So if it's the Great Depression and you have trouble getting a job, a reasonable person would say, hey, kid, it's the Great Depression. We're all struggling right now.
Yeah.
But we don't have that concept with dating, where I see this. I think Gen Xers and older
Hmm.
have an extra hard issue comprehending the dating crisis
Yeah.
because it's so distant from what they grew up in.
Yeah, it's
And
it's it's very difficult to get it through to them no matter how much they look directly
yeah,
at it.
yeah. And they're like, I'll hear responses like, why don't you just go to a bar? Why don't you hit on girls in the street? And like, that's so removed from reality.
Yeah.
And they're like, I don't know, man. Like, it wouldn't it be easier just to get a girlfriend than to launch a revolution? And
At
the
what a
thing
certain point, no.
And for a certain amount of men, and these things hit critical mass.
Yeah.
Like the fall of the Soviet Union, no
Hmm.
one thought it would happen, but just variables hit critical mass.
Yeah.
And it's also a bunch of other things where this demographic of young men have been pissed on their whole life in a variety of ways.
Yeah.
If you're a Gen Z or millennial young man, your entire life has been spent in ritual humiliation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's I don't know why people do that and then are surprised. It's like that the Pikachu face meme. It's like when you
Yeah.
abuse somebody their whole life and then they do something unpleasant back. It's like, "Oh my God, who could have
Yeah.
predicted that?" And you turn on, you watch any movie, you watch any sitcom that's been made in my life. It's all the father is a fat idiot, and you know,
Yeah.
I think people maybe they just assume that's how we viewed people throughout all of history or something. I don't
Yeah.
know.
And people are just so complacent. And when people are complacent, they're ignorant.
Yeah, for sure. Um, I think that's I don't know how to fight against that. I think there's about 1,800 people listening right now. Hopefully, some of them are slightly less ignorant. I think that's all the best we can do.
Yeah.
Tell your friends and family. Send them the link. Make them watch it. I do want
Bro,
to
your chat is just, your chat's pop. I can't even read it. It's going so fast.
really. How do you find it? I'm so bad at this.
So I just click on your channel.
Yeah, I should probably
It's,
be looking at my chat while I'm doing this. Sorry,
no,
guys.
you wouldn't be able to read anything even if you looked at it.
All right. Well, thanks, chat. I'll get to some of them later.
Yeah.
Um,
Um,
I want to ask you about Mouse Utopia.
right.
You
Um,
made a video about the Mouse Utopia, which is basically I'll explain it real quick. They took some mice and they put them in perfect conditions so that they were perfectly happy and had everything they needed, and they reproduced really quickly. But once they got to a critical mass where everything was uncomfortable, they didn't just die back down to a normal level. They were all psychologically damaged somehow and died off completely, right? Like, didn't every last one of them
yeah.
die? Yeah. So there's something that happens when you make things too good and pack too many mice into a tight space. They self-destruct. So
Yeah.
what I want to ask you about that is, can you explain the parallels you see between Mouse Utopia and what's happening to us? What do you think is the role of feminism and, this way that we're
Yeah.
treating men? What's the role of that in it? And has it ever happened before in human history? Or is this the first time?
Yeah. So for a brief rundown of Mouse Utopia, what happens is that they put 9 mice in the cage. The cage can hold 6,000, and then the cage hit 2,000. And then
Hmm.
what happened then is female mice became aggressive and masculine. Male mice would be effeminate, and they would lick themselves all day and groom themselves all day without doing anything or
Hmm.
breeding.
Yeah.
You had gangs of homeless mice who would hang out in the center of the colony. A lot of mice became addicted to adrenaline and social stimulation and social approval.
Hmm.
Um, the mice stopped having children. They stopped having the ability to socialize. A lot of mice became autistic. They were gangs of violent mice who would murder other mice for no reason.
How do you know
Um,
if a mouse is autistic?
it just doesn't have the ability to socialize. It just sits there and stares.
Gotcha.
Um, and it's
Okay.
kind of awkward socially.
Yeah.
It's weird because autism wasn't like a popular term in the 60s. Autism was a
Right.
clinical term. It wasn't
Right.
a buzzword.
Right.
Um, but yeah, so that happened, and the mouse colony fails each time due to social breakdown. And
Yeah.
so we see a lot of the same things. And the thing that really, the thing that shocks me is I've read about every era of history, and I constantly have multiple simulations running in my head.
Hmm.
The way my head works is I have 5 different simulations, and I try to plug the data I see into different simulations
Hmm.
to see which simulation best understands what's going on.
Yeah.
And the thing is, there are a lot of parallels in history to what we're having now,
Yeah.
but it's on a completely different level in that For example, decadence. Decadence is a social phase with breakdown of shared values, collapse in birth rate, um, these values.
Mm-hmm.
So forward history with the Greeks and the Romans or India or China or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But what's happening in our society that only happens in Mass Utopia is the self-hating nihilism, the cultural suicide,
Yeah.
the complete breakdown of ability to socialize,
Mm-hmm.
extreme anxiety. Feminism was never this big,
Mm-hmm.
and the hatred of life itself. And so
Yeah.
I was comparing my predictions 4 years ago to today. And one of the things I didn't predict was how suicidally nihilistic the left would get, because
Yeah.
there's no parallel to it in history, where a lot of Western countries are purposely degrowing their economies.
Yeah.
Many Western countries are importing immigrants for the express purpose of replacing their native population. And
Mm-hmm.
there's no society in history before which committed suicide. And the degree to which the birth rate is crashing has no historic parallel. For example, the Roman birth rates did go down,
Mm-hmm.
but we're talking going from like 6 million people in Italy to 4 million. What we're
Yeah.
looking at now is that for every 100 Koreans alive today,
Yeah.
if the trends continue, there will be 4 at the end of this century.
Yeah. That's pretty
And
quick.
yeah, and so Mouse Utopia really scares me. And I think Mouse Utopia is one of my most important videos. It's one of the videos I'm most proud of, in that it's just, there are things you can understand through history, but Mouse Utopia is the only paradigm that can explain it. And I'm 22, I'm a Zoomer. A lot of Zoomer stuff makes no sense. And I wish adults or older people were aware of how mentally poor off Zoomers are,
Yeah.
where if you go on dates with, I have never gone on a date with a single Zoomer girl without a serious mental health issue.
Oh
They
my.
all have extreme anxiety, they have self-loathing, they envy people. It's just like,
Yeah.
it's crazy. Where like I'll visit teenage relatives and they won't be willing to drive they won't be willing to go on like a 50-minute drive to hang out in Airbnb. You
Yeah.
talk to Zoomers, they're too scared to make phone calls for work, or
Really?
to yeah, or they're too anxious just to leave their hometown for a road trip.
Mm-hmm.
Like, a lot of Zoomers have stunningly poor mental health, and it scares me. And I wish that we had more of a reckoning about it, because I think if we don't solve this, this will turn into the biggest social issue.
For sure,
How do
because
you build a population that's like that?
yeah, it's an entire generation that won't be capable of relating to itself or anyone else. And what do you do with people
Yeah,
like that? They're just gonna, what are they just gonna live outside and eat squirrels or something? Like,
yeah,
if you
exactly.
can't
And
run an organization, then you can't keep the lights on.
yeah, these people can't friggin' procreate. And like,
Yeah.
how does someone who has all this anxiety have a kid anyway?
Right. Yeah. How do you
It's
deal with
funny.
that?
Yeah. There's this whole trend of like 40-year-old women saying, "Oh my God, I'm still finding myself. I'm not ready to have a kid."
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe when I'm
You're
44. Yeah. It's so
you're
the parallels that you've given us are,
yeah.
numerous and spot on. Like with the males grooming
Thank you so
themselves in a feminine way, and the females acting aggressive and masculine. All that stuff is so, it's obvious that's what's happening right now.
Yeah, exactly. It's scary.
Do you think that everything's going to crash? How much do you think it's going to crash?
That's a great question. Things have to crash, because I always view things as part of a trend,
Yeah.
and people assume the status quo will remain. But the reality is that stabilization isn't normal. There's multiple trends going on, and the trends need to resolve.
Yeah.
And so people assume the status quo will remain. Well, the reality is I once said in the podcast, the world is not reasonable, and expecting it to be reasonable is in fact unreasonable.
Yeah.
And so things have to reset, and it's frankly because just our stupid and arrogant that there's so many trends that you can't push further.
Hmm.
One being our debt, where we have the most debt of any era ever.
Yeah.
Another being immigration. Another being the mental health issues. And so what's going on with all of that is that you have all these toggles that can't be pushed further.
Right.
And so you need to start having blood. And the question is, how bad is it? And I think the world's population will go down by half by the end of this century.
Hmm.
It'll be a gradual process. So it might not be that traumatic to actually live through.
Yeah. It's
But I
not
think
going to be.
America's going to have a war. I think a lot of countries will have external wars. I frankly do think Western civilization will survive.
Okay.
Um, I think that I go back to the Stone Age, and I think America will probably survive,
Yeah.
but I think it's not going to be pretty.
No, no. No, it's not going to be pretty. But I mean, my personal strategy is I'm just trying to get enough money to get a place that is in between a city area and like remote. So
Yeah,
somewhere in like a 10,000 person city and just I don't know what I'm going to do. I guess I'll just keep doing this from there.
yeah.
But I
I
guess
want
that's the
to.
only. Yeah, go ahead.
I want to keep doing YouTube. This gig is too big to stop. Too good
Yeah.
to stop.
It is. This just train doesn't have any brakes.
Hmm. I'm curious, Mr. Ho.
Mhm.
What is? We've been friends for a couple months. What is something that you have learned from me talking about the cycles of history that surprised you?
I was just really pleasantly surprised that all of my schizo ranting is like based in reasonable observations about history because I was doing this all intuitively. I was just saying
Yeah,
I can see this and this and this and this happening, and that's not normal. That's historically novel. That's gonna
yeah,
this thing over here is gonna affect this over there. Like people don't think about that or care about it, and when I point it
exactly.
out, they just brush it off and they go, no, it'll be fine. Everything is going to be, you'll be able to buy Transformers at the mall forever. Nothing's
It's
ever going to
funny.
change in that way. What's that?
Both of us got blackpilled by Los Angeles dating because
Yeah.
um, seeing this, because I used to run a social club for influencers in Los Angeles, and
Hmm.
seeing that is what made me believe in Mouse Utopia.
Yeah.
Um, because the social relationships in Los Angeles did not make sense in a normal society. And like, what are these people's motivations? And
Yeah.
because whenever I see someone or something, I try to think, I try to get into their head to think, why are they making this decision?
Yeah.
And in Los Angeles, the only way I could figure out their motivations was was Mouse Utopia.
Yeah. Yeah. That was the only thing that they can be actually understood to be doing is to serve the mouse utopia version of the brain. That's why women are complaining that men are
Exactly
soft
right.
and they're just preening themselves. They don't have jobs. That's why men are complaining that women are masculine. And it's like, well, what do you want in this relationship? And it's something that's just fundamentally untenable. It's not actually a part of a relationship.
Yeah. I think of your I think of your video where it's Joe Rogan was talking to this MMA fighter,
Hmm.
and she was like, I didn't like that I didn't like that my guy was like showing pain
Oh,
when he was
yeah.
being beaten to death.
Right. Yeah. He tried to
Um,
block it. Yeah.
and you said that this is like level two, level psyche, because Homath
It's
built these
basic. Yeah.
levels of consciousness.
Yeah.
There's this levels of consciousness. And so we're degrading back to lower levels because in every society, there are some people at the higher levels. But I think like in America today, 40% to half of the population is at level four,
Hmm.
which is the medieval level of psychological development. And so
Hmm.
small elites are at level, like I've seen some stats, 5% of the population is at six. Sorry, 10% of the population is at
Yeah.
six, 10% is at 5%,
Yeah.
half is at four,
Yeah.
and then like 30% of the population is stuck at the primitive levels. And
Yeah. Yeah. Most people are
infinitesimal
followers.
small
Yeah.
amounts are at number seven. I mean, the authors I read,
Yeah.
these guys running in World War II, they were all at number seven,
Hmm.
but they didn't. Our society didn't progress past that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I one of the things that I'm hoping to do, which is it just seems like less and less likely, but I'm trying to put resources together to, like assess people and gather together the people who can think at higher levels and sort of like
Yeah,
install something that gets us around this, but it seems like we only have like 10 minutes.
our friend Deep Read Dan, he would be able to do that,
Yeah.
but we need to get resources for it.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, well, we'll be on the lookout for that. I was talking
Yeah.
to someone the other day who said that he knows a billionaire who wants to invest in something, so
There are
maybe we can pull it off.
so many people know so many billionaires who are investing in so many things.
Well, billionaires probably
But
just have a lot of helpers.
I mean, like, I know this is a sign of my like once lots of people. I know that might have what said might have come across as elitist, but
Sure.
so many people say they know people who have money,
Yeah.
who say they invest in things, but there's 1/10 as many projects that actually get made,
Yeah.
uh,
It's a
as
lot.
compared to people who say they know people.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we'll see. You know, that's all I've got.
Yeah,
That was the best shot that I had. I'm trying to organize people psychologically and socially through the internet
yeah.
and use
I
AI to assess them and figure out who should go where. Um,
yeah.
what do you think people should do to make this whatever is coming as painless as possible? Because you know, we're doomsaying a lot here, and a lot of people agree with us, and a lot of people won't. But at the very least, everyone agrees that inflation is getting worse and wages are not keeping up. Like there are things
Yeah.
going wrong. So whatever it is that happens, what do you think people? What's the best thing that people can do to make it not as bad?
Um, know yourself. Everyone's different. And I tell people when I assess their strategy, try to find try to find the advantages you have and play to them to your best advantage.
Yeah.
And I think the religious are going to survive this, and loyalty and a connection to God will help you through this crisis. And at the same time, um, if you don't believe in God, no one can make you believe in God.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you need a connection to some abstract moral concept to deal with these hard times.
Yeah.
And if you build a community of people to help you out, I think that would be one of the best things you could do. But when all's said and done, um, I don't think this is going to be a fast apocalypse. I don't think just tomorrow the sky's going to fall out. I
Right.
think it's going to be a gradual thing of like, oh, a civil war is going to start, and then Texas becomes a new government, and then the right burns down some blue cities, and then there's internal squabbles inside them, and then
Yeah.
gradually the state of the economy gets worse. It's going to be like the crisis of the 14th century.
Yeah.
Um, is the crisis of the 14th or 17th centuries took
Mm-hmm.
decades,
Yeah.
and I think gradually over time, if you're looking out, you'll figure out various hacks and system stuff.
All right. So look for community, believe in something more than yourself. Buckle up because it's just gonna go down real
Yeah,
slow. Like if you're having a hard time now, probably gonna have more of a hard time soon.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Downsize, I guess. Buy gold?
Yeah.
I don't know. Bitcoin? I don't know. I
What
have no
are
idea what to
trends
do.
that you what are trends that you've seen recently in dating that that you didn't see a month ago?
Oh, that's really interesting because, you know, I'm haven't really left my house a lot for the last 2 years. Most of my dating experience was like 2007 until 2022, and some of that was
Yeah,
in COVID. Um, it seems to me that people are getting more bitter. Like, you know, I'm
yeah,
viewing it mostly just through the technology, but it seems like there's almost like a competition between people for who can have the greatest mismatch between their standards and what their standards should be. And
yeah,
it's like showing off. I can get away with behaving like I am this great. And it's almost it isn't realistic, but maybe they know it isn't realistic. Maybe everybody
yeah,
has given up to the level where they're just out playing because it's fun.
yeah,
There's many layers of just clownery and
yeah,
foolishness happening. And again, just the same way that we spoke earlier about the only way to understand people is through the mouse utopia thing, that the people are kind of twisted and broken, and that what they're looking for in dating is serving an aspect of a personality that shouldn't exist in a
yeah,
healthy culture. I think that that's sort of I'm seeing more and more of that happen.
yeah. Um, yeah, and I mean, you think that people will be laughed at past a certain point.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in that, in that, if if I said I'm only going to be I'm only going to date a Victoria's Secret model, that
Yeah.
would be completely ridiculous to
Mm-hmm.
everyone involved,
Yeah.
and then you guys would know it would be ridiculous and would reflect poorly upon me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, there's just the degree of disconnect from reality and the base lower impulses that you see
Yeah.
are silly here.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I see is that, like, for young people, their dating apps are the easy default answer. I think
Yeah.
like a majority of young people meet through dating apps, and I
Mm-hmm.
think as of now, I wonder for Gen Z what those numbers are. I guess like 80% for
It
Gen Z
would
or
have
something.
to be a lot because yeah, like just like you said, they don't have the social skills and they're probably not going out
But
as much.
I don't know anyone who likes dating apps. So it's strange to see the defaulting back onto a method that no one likes.
Yeah,
And like I wonder, do young people meet at bars anymore? Because whenever I go to bars, I see people sitting together in their groups
yeah,
and not talking to each other unless it's nightclubs
yeah.
where everyone's dancing on the floor. But like you can't talk to people in nightclubs.
I know that they did a few years ago. I don't know how much things have changed over the last few years. Like I haven't observed much of what happens in public since the COVID lockdowns. I know that
Yeah,
immediately before then, people would still meet in bars and whatnot. But
yeah,
I don't know how much psychological damage has occurred since then.
yeah. Huh. I also find that dating varies vastly across what part of the country you're in.
Yeah, for sure.
So it's very different from Pennsylvania, from California, from Texas, and even more different in like, I don't know, China.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So, there's a lot of
Yeah,
nuance there that I don't have that much to say about. Like people will make videos about, what dating is like in this city and that city, but they all kind of complain about the same things. They all say, "Oh, it's dating sucks here," but then dating sucks everywhere.
I feel sorry for the Chinese bros. They got massively shafted because,
Yeah.
there's a lot more men in China than women.
Yeah, that was
And
the same thing that Mao did when he melted down all the tools to make iron and it was
yeah,
useless. It's like they have this pattern there where they think if we just think about this on a really large scale and make a big change, then we can direct where we go. And then it has
yeah.
this unintended consequence that ruins everything. And
It
like,
stems from magical thinking.
yeah,
I read a book that I read a book that talks about that. They're looking for basically magical solutions, but the the thing with China is like I hear about Chinese guys that if you want a girlfriend there, you need to have a car, an apartment, and a TV. And
yeah,
China's not a wealthy country, so that's
yeah.
very expensive. And you have to give your girl your credit card
Mm-hmm.
and total permission to spend whatever. And so
Mm-hmm.
I feel sorry for the Chinese guys. And like in Japan, half the population under 40 are virgins, and I guess it's similar in China,
Mm-hmm.
and that's just terrifying.
Yeah, I had a actually similar experience recently. It's kind of funny. I met someone who was not affected either very much at all, well, a little bit by, the culture and what it does to people, but she was great. But then, among other things, I gradually realized that even though I'm doing better than I ever have with money, I'm just nowhere near ready to take care of someone. Like
Yeah,
her
same.
needs were way out of,
Yeah. I saw this statistic about how much money you need to have a comfortable family in America. And so in California it was
yeah,
$300,000. In Texas it was 200,000. In the lowest state, Mississippi, it's 170K.
yeah,
And I had always intuitively felt like I couldn't support a family. And then
yep,
I saw that and I thought, holy shit, it's so expensive.
yep.
And
It's really bad.
yeah, and it's just crazy because look at Homer Simpson. Back in the day,
Yeah,
Homer was a low middle class loser,
yeah,
and now having stay-at-home wife, three kids, go on multiple vacations, that's
yeah.
insane.
Yeah,
And
Homer Simpson was like, let me click over to
he was like
myself.
a four.
Yeah, Homer Simpson was fat and dumb and didn't go to college, and he was able to get like, Marge is a drawing, but I'm betting that she was a
Yeah,
six. And
yeah,
he was able to marry her and have three kids and do that with just a high school diploma. And now, like, I saw the numbers that you were talking about before COVID. In most states, it was below 100,000 that you needed to raise a family of four.
yeah.
And now, because of they handed out all the money and all the inflation, it's somewhere. I don't think it's below 150 anywhere. Maybe it's
No,
140.
Mississippi's the lowest. It's 170K.
Yeah, and then some of them are almost up to 300. So it's 170 to 280,000 a year that you need.
Yeah,
So what percentage of the population is that? Like, isn't that the top five?
yeah. So, yeah, yeah. 300K is the top like several. It's top five, top 3%.
Yeah.
Um, The income to be part of I saw these statistics on income to be upper and middle class.
Hmm.
I saw this statistic that said middle class making 150K a year. I thought
Hmm.
that's absolutely ridiculous. And then I thought, wait, if you're talking about middle class as not proportional to the general population,
Hmm.
but living what used to be considered a middle class life, that might be right.
Yeah. Yeah, if you're measuring it like by standard of living, by the amount of comfort that you have, then yeah, middle class is way above 100,000 now.
Yeah,
I remember when I was growing up in my neighborhood, the average income was something like 77,000 for a family of four, and everyone was it was a really safe, comfortable neighborhood. If you had
yeah,
77,000 for a family of four in the same area right now, you'd be dead in the water.
yeah, yeah. It's craziest, especially in California, because I lived in Los Angeles for a few months and I calculated the cost, as I'm from rural Pennsylvania.
Hmm.
I calculated the cost of what a comfortable life would be like in what a comfortable life in my hometown would cost in Los Angeles.
Hmm.
I realized it was absolutely insane.
Yeah, yeah, it's bizarre. So yeah, I mean that's something I say every once in a while is no solution, only problem. That's all that
Yeah,
I don't know how to tell people what to do. Like I'm just trying to collect some money and
yeah.
run away just by myself, I guess. I don't know. Maybe I need to join a community or
You can be
something.
part of the crew.
Yeah, what crew? You got a crew? Tell me later.
um,
Don't tell the audience about it. Keep it secret.
yeah. So, but I mean, it is. What part of modern dating are you most depressed about?
Um God. I think that, I'm basing it on myself. Like I don't think that I am a particularly low value person. I think, I'm taller than average. I think I'm better looking than average, or at least I used to be. Maybe I still am for my age. I don't know. I used to be really jacked. I'm really smart. I have a lot of things going for me. And
Yeah,
and I know that I have some issues. Like people have always said, "Oh, you're too sad." But I don't know if that justifies how hard of a time I've had making anything work.
yeah,
And I have to imagine that I'm not the only person experiencing that.
yeah, yeah. Um, I have a lot of buddies who, like, I think have very high SMV,
Hmm.
and it's crazy to look at their lives where, like, none of them are married or satisfied, and a lot of them, like, I have a good friend, very attractive guy, doing well financially.
Hmm.
He was running a social club for influencers,
Hmm.
and that friend, he struggled with dating, and his friends too, who are similar to him. And I'm thinking, if this friend is struggling with dating, what's happening to society?
Yeah.
Uh, and yeah, and it's depressing, and I wish there was more. The thing I really dislike is the lack of empathy.
Yeah.
If these things were happening and the population was able to think to themselves, well, it sucks and we're sorry, but we're here to help you.
Yeah.
But instead of that, they spit at the population.
Yeah. They say it. They that's one thing that both you and I have experienced. Just because we are concerned about these problems and talk about them and try to point out, here is a part of the problem. Here is something that people do that indicates, and here's a, we talk about it and people will call us incels, which is like
Yeah.
it's like an attempt to pack us down into this underclass that can be abused without anybody having empathy for you.
Yeah. I was watching the Whatever podcast, and Adam 22 was debating with Marquette. And
Hmm.
Marquette is actually one of my favorite red pillars.
Hmm.
I think he's very smart. But Adam 22, because Marquette was making fun of Adam 22 for being a cuck. And then
Hmm.
Adam 22 said, "You're poor." And then he
Hmm.
walked off. And um, then one of the ladies said, "Isn't Adam taller than you?"
Hmm.
Because she thought saying that Adam 22 was taller meant that he won the argument. And I'm
Hmm.
like, what?
That was it.
Yeah.
The taller guy is just better.
Yeah, that was her logic. Like, if you're rich and taller, that automatically says you're higher social status. But that's just
Yeah.
insane.
Well, I mean
And
that's the way, like that's really the basic way that I think organisms think. I think that's just how life works, where it's like this uh, uh, member of the species has greater signs of health and is therefore more likely to survive, and survival is the
yeah,
pinnacle value. So you shut up. Nothing you say matters because you're not a survivor.
yeah. The thing I dislike about a lot of our culture and the red pill as well is it's so short term and popularity based.
Mm-hmm.
And 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 so like a lot of the red pill is about, oh my God, you got to get jacked and get girls and get money. But are
Mm-hmm.
you happy? Are you satisfied? They
So,
don't
right, you
care.
shut up.
It's just
Nothing
a
you say.
short-term popularity. Or like everyone's like, oh my God, I want to be a movie star and drive a Ferrari and
Mm-hmm.
that stuff. And I'm thinking, like, do we actually, because I've nearly died 4 times, and each
Oh,
time I
wow.
nearly, sorry,
So that came out of nowhere. Tell me about it.
I'll tell you about later.
Okay.
When I'll tell you about why that happened. And but each time I nearly die, I think to myself, what do I want out of life, and what do I not want? And the
Mm-hmm.
conclusion I came to is to focus on the things that are meaningful in my life, in the things that you look back on and you take pride in.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't do any of that. There's no focus in the things that you look back on your deathbed and you're proud of.
Yeah.
But when even in the hard periods of your life, you look back in your life and you think, my life is worthwhile because I did things that were I can take pride in.
Yeah. That's God, you're kind of hitting me right where it hurts because I spent my life doing that. Like I had some difficulty getting a job because I graduated in the 2008
Yeah.
crash and everything, but I still spent my life like developing myself and following my dreams and becoming a different kind of person. I have so many memories that I never thought I would form. Like when I graduated college, I thought my life was going to be basically buying a condo and playing video games and meeting a really mid girl who couldn't do better than me. And I was like, that's fine. Just reach for the
Yeah.
middle. And I did so much better than that. I reached for so much more and I got so much more out of life. And just this whole way that things are turning, it kind of mutes those memories. It's like
Yeah.
that whole living to remember what you did on your deathbed. It's almost like a monkey's paw wish where I have the memories, but now they're like dust in my mouth. It's like, well, what were they all for if this is just how the world was going to turn out?
I think you're in a stressed out headspace now, but there'll be a point
Yeah.
in the future where you will be able to take pride in them.
Yeah.
And do you have a better option? Would you have rather lived a life where where you're, let's say you take on the persona of DJ Monkey. DJ Monkey hangs out in Miami and is a complete degenerate
Mm-hmm.
and is constantly broke and going through toxic relationships. Do you want to be DJ Monkey?
I mean, it depends how dumb I am. Like I think that I always really wanted knowledge and understanding and now I have it and it
Yeah,
hurts and I'm tired. And I think that there's
yeah,
just a lot to be said for ignorance is bliss and being able to live a life that has because this is sort of like what I was teaching with self maximize. This is the map of how to make decisions in your life.
yeah,
It this whole thing is how you live your life. It's how everyone does it, whether it's conscious or not. And I recommend how to do it consciously, but it doesn't do anything if you're so conscious of it that there isn't anywhere to go because you've already. I don't know how to
yeah,
explain that. It's like it has collapsed into the way that I see the world. It's like beginning
yeah.
something isn't gonna. I don't know how to explain it. But if I was
You need
DJ,
to have
go ahead.
you need to have an equal amount of faith and logic.
Yeah.
Logic without faith devolves into just intellectual masturbation and nihilism.
Mm-hmm.
But if your logical abilities outgrow your faith, it'll result in you devolving into just the web. People without direction, their minds become a labyrinth they can't escape.
Yeah.
And I mean, I haven't lived a perfect life. I have struggled with mental health.
Mm-hmm.
But what I say whenever I'm in a place like that is I have faith that what I'm doing is right and I will keep pushing on.
Yeah.
And that the world does make sense. And I always tell myself the world does make sense and I shouldn't think too much about it.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm working, like with your whole DJ monkey or whatever thing. It's like the world makes sense to him, so whether or not he's living like an honorable life doesn't matter.
Yeah,
I'm hoping that the world makes sense again because everything that
yeah,
I had done up until COVID was going in a direction and then all like the whole rug got pulled out and now I'm just like,
yeah,
"Well, what, huh? I don't know what's the next
yeah.
direction."
One of my father once said, "Let your thought and action be one. The second you think, act."
Mhm.
And what he meant by that is, it's not a statement of be impulsive. It's remove thinking about things, just remove the doubt and just act.
Mhm.
And I mean, I have some things I could say to you privately about how to deal with that. But I find I've had periods of my life where I was in doubt and I didn't really know what I was doing, and it took me like a while each time to find the new meaning.
Yeah.
But if you do look long enough, you will, and you don't give up, you will eventually find it.
Yeah. Well, I don't have a choice. It's that or just keep doing the
You
same
could,
pattern every day. Just keep making TikTok videos. I finally
yeah,
figured out how to open up my channel and look at it. And
yeah,
I've got some paid comments, and I think that some of these questions are good for you.
sure thing.
There's Danny Rocker says, "We see you." Matthew Hansen says, "Thank you both. Ignore this message." I didn't. Sorry, Matthew. Avocado Atrocity just says, "Here's $2. Financial incentive." Nightlight says, "Political leaders say the earth is overpopulated. They sure do. And they do that for a reason." Prideful Observer. Um, okay, different names or aspects for the same catastrophe. Incel revolution, psychological black death, global civil war, identity tribalism. Yeah, I think that's just what
That's,
we were talking about earlier. I think he's just
yeah,
agreeing with us.
I'll take the
Um,
other two.
the other two what?
The International Civil War, and
Oh,
what was the
sure.
tribalism thing?
Global civil war, identity slash tribalism. That's in parentheses.
Okay,
Psychological
yeah,
black
yeah,
death.
yeah. Those are all good terms. I might start using the global civil war as a term. Thank you.
Yeah. Let's see. Someone says Wall Street Tech says economics parlay to romance, and he put an asterisk. I think I agree with that. Somebody named Mr. Quaster Hopper says, "I'm a person. I'm a free man. Congratulations." A Meyer 23 says, "How do you think the Great Awakening of society will affect the future of the West?" Do you want to take that one?
The Great Awakening, like the
Yeah,
thing.
like people waking up to what politics really is and how America is like. I saw a TikTok just today of this woman who, she seemed perfectly intelligent and normal woman, normal life and everything, but she was talking about how it was just today that she figured out that when she turns on the news or listens to the government or what she learned in school was like not the truth. They were saying that to make you think something, to make you behave a certain way. And she's like,
Yeah.
"Oh, well, shucks, I've been fooled." It's so
What?
hard for me to understand that there are people still like that, but the Great
Yeah.
Awakening is people going out of that ignorance and beginning to understand that the information they've been subject to is designed to
Yeah.
fool them.
What level of consciousness is she at? Is she at level 4?
I would say that if somebody has been falling victim to those really shallow, obvious lies all their life, and then has that revelation, I would say that that would be like a cognitive step from 4 to 5.
Okay. I think these people always exist in every society because I'm thinking of the Middle Ages. The peasants in the Middle Ages believed like the most insane like stuff the Catholic Church said.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and like they literally believed in Noah's Ark. But then in the priest class in the Middle Ages, they were taught these esoteric secret teachings that the
Mm-hmm.
public didn't know about. So in the Middle Ages, you had lots of people who were stuck at lower levels, but then people who were still at level 7. But
Mm-hmm.
the Great Awakening thing, it makes me chuckle
Yeah.
because as a historian, the Great Awakening was a religious revival in the 1740s and the
Ah.
1840s. And I invented a term called the Great Awakening, which is the rise of wokeness.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think the Great Awakening, wokeness can't survive because wokeness is so stupid.
Right.
Wokeness is dysfunctional
It's
on every
divorced from
scale.
reality. You can't
Yeah,
like.
and also
Yeah.
it flagellates its own supporters.
Right.
Like, how do you have a movement that tells, and if you're a white man, you have absolutely no incentive to work with wokeness
Right.
because there's no way to be in the right. And so
Yeah.
I think wokeness will get wiped out. But the question is, what will replace wokeness? And will we move from one matrix to another?
Mm,
Because it's very easy to move from like the left matrix to like what Nick Fuentes believes that the world is like a giant conspiracy and
mm-hmm.
it's really hard to get people to actually think for themselves. They
Yeah.
will do anything they can to not.
Yeah. It's like they're slippery. It's like one of
Yeah.
those balloons that's like a long donut that you squeeze it and it pops out of your hand. You can just shove people's faces in facts and they'll just go, "That is not there. There is nothing there. I am
Yeah.
not. I am asleep."
I'm going to get going soon. Do you have any final questions?
Yeah, I have one more comment for you that I want to see if you can answer.
Yeah.
The Saint 135 says, What do you think about BRICS nations going into an asset-backed currency with gold and silver at the top, and what that will do to the inflation and the value of the U.S. dollar? Yeah, any insights?
So I have a video on that actually.
Oh.
I made a video on I've made a video on the BRICS, and I made a video on will the BRICS go up to the dollar? And the
Mm-hmm.
short answer is no, because those countries are addicted to inflation too. So they
Mm-hmm.
can't move to a deflationary currency like gold because it would ruin their ability to print money. And secondly, none of them have a large enough share of the global economy to become a new standard reserve, in that the US is a quarter of the world's economy.
Yeah.
China is 13%,
Mm-hmm.
and every other country in the BRICS is less than 13% combined. So
Mm-hmm.
the US has a larger economy than all of the BRICS combined.
Yeah.
And even China doesn't have enough economic power to be able to destabilize the US as the dominant currency. And also, no one trusts the legality of the BRICS enough.
Mm-hmm.
Because so if China is the new global power, no one trusts that the Chinese will arbitrate legal disputes or not use their power their money and currency as a bludgeon. So I don't think the BRICS will go for that. Right, BRICS are Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa.
Yeah. So you don't, what your answer is, you don't think that it's gonna
No,
like
that's
move
not
the
going to
needle,
happen.
or okay. All right.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't know enough about economics to comment, but good answer. All
yeah.
right, let's stop on that really awkward spot where I didn't know anything. All right.
Okay,
Yeah.
good being here. Thanks
Yeah,
for having me.
great to have you. Great discussion.
Sure
Thanks
thing.
everyone for being here. Good night.
Peace.